Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jeremy Schumacher. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm the Jer in Wellness with Jer. Thanks for stopping by and checking out the channel. Today, we are talking about Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. I think is exclusively on Netflix. I don't know. It maybe had a short theater run. A Frankenstein movie. Hooray! I very much enjoy the novel Frankenstein. Both my parents, at various points in their lives, have been English teachers. So I maybe grew up with like a weird appreciation of Brit Lit because that's what my mom taught. I also know an extensive amount of Tolkien trivia because my dad taught sci-fi fantasy at one point, and I just grew up paging through a Tolkien encyclopedia for fun because I was a weird kid who read encyclopedias for fun. But I also have a Rime of the Ancient Mariner tattoo, and probably know more of Byron's works than an average person because of my parents having lots of classical literature lying around and me being undiagnosed ADHD, reading a ton of stuff. So I like Frankenstein. I studied a bit of Frankenstein at a higher level in college. I was a cultural studies minor, and one of the books that we studied, in monsters, robots, and cyborgs was a class I took in college. One of my favorite classes, along with aliens. The same professor taught both of those classes, and they're both great. But we got to read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in college, and just sort of like be like, what would Freud have to say about Mary Shelley? And those classes were really fun compared to the classes I had that were psychology at Minnesota, which is a great place to study psychology, and also is really heavy on the science. So I had this, I've talked about this elsewhere, but I had this juxtaposition of psychology as art in sort of my cultural studies classes and psychology as science in my psych classes. And I still land somewhere in between those two sort of poles, as it were, in my approach to psychology and therapy. But so Frankenstein has a very special place in my heart. It's a great story. Mary Shelley is currently finally getting a lot of the credit she deserves as an author, and I think that's good. Frankenstein's one of those monsters, one of those creature features from early film that I think define the horror genre. We've got, when you think of the classic sort of Halloween, Frankenstein, Dracula, a mummy, some sort of swamp creature from the lagoon, Black Lagoon. I think that's a children's story. Anyways, Frankenstein's up there with Dracula and werewolves and mummies, sort of the classic horror shtick. And Guillermo del Toro, the director, has been on a public tour for like 20 some years saying he wants to direct Frankenstein. At one point was talking about doing 2 to 3 films, which thankfully this one is not. It's pretty tight. It's not a loyal adaptation, but I didn't really mind some of the creative changes other than basically inventing a new character. It's not total invention. The brother of Victor is in the original book, just not as a main character like in the movie. But yes, I've not reread Frankenstein probably since college, if I'm being honest. And so a bit of going off memory, I did do a bit of prep for this video. Not like I plotted it out or anything, but just comparing and contrasting some of the plot points between the two. Yeah, spoiler-free version here. I liked it. I think it's good. I think it was gorgeously shot. You can tell made with a lot of love and care, not just for the source material, but also making it the Frankenstein movie, the Frankenstein story for a modern generation. I'm pretty critical of green screen stuff. Yes, you can tell I have one behind me because they're so ubiquitous and easy to get. But I think, there are things that age well in media and there are things that don't age well. And I think a lot of modern media that relies heavily on green screen isn't going to age that well as technology continues to improve. But I got lost in some of the imagery and the cinematography of it's pretty solid, even though it's almost exclusively on green screen. The performances are great. I I didn't mind the monster's aesthetic, but it wasn't my favorite depiction of Frankenstein. I don't know that it was a hideous monster to behold. But I could tell what they were going for with sort of like the flesh and muscle of what they were trying to do. It was fine. Um, yeah, it was good. I think it's worth a watch. I think the main cast was all very, very good. The cinematography, like I said, was very lovingly shot. You can tell this was an important story for Guillermo del Toro. Pieces of the original are very true, and then the things that are adaptive, I think, are maybe things Del Toro wanted to do, or their homages to earlier adaptations, like the lightning reanimation is not in the Frankenstein novel, and so I think an homage to some of the earlier things, media depictions of the story that then became kind of ubiquitous. So really good. I think it's worth a watch. It starts slow, is my main criticism. I watched it in two parts because I was bored, honestly. Um, and so I think it does start a little slow, but then picks up. Um, Spoiler free review ending here. Um, Frankenstein is, I think, holds a lot of space for who Mary Shelley was, that she, as an author at a time when it was harder for female authors to get recognition, was married to a famous dude who also gets a lot of probably undeserved credit for what he seems to have contributed, but because he's a dude and she was married to him, must have been, his artistic genius that rubbed off on her or something. I don't know. I'm not misogynistic about it, but culture has been. And so I think there's a lot of fascination with her and her professional career and her personal life. And a lot gets read into like the loss of the children and how that maybe played into her writing the novel. And, it's the dead author thing where we as an audience can ascribe a lot of intent to her writing and her writing style based on what we know about her life, and whether or not that's true at the time that she wrote it and how she talks about writing the story, it doesn't seem to be particularly relevant. And as a therapist who works with people who've lost kids, it's hard to imagine that losing a child wouldn't have been a big deal to her. Granted, at that time in history, a lot more people lost a lot more kids because the infant mortality rate was a lot higher. We're trying to bring that back, apparently, at least in America, for some reason. The Protect the Kids crowd really hates mothers and children. So I don't know. I don't know what we're doing. Um, the film differs in some things. Again, I think the creation motifs are certainly there. The sort of looming specter of death is there, and how we can make peace with that or not. And so I think some of those themes are there. Um, but yeah, I mean, Mary Shelley was an interesting human, led an interesting life. Her husband, the author, the poet, um, also, supposedly the story goes, as told by the people who were there, that Mary Shelley wrote this while vacationing with her husband and with Lord Byron, and like their cousin who had an illicit child by Byron. Again, I didn't do extensive research on which of these myths are just myths and famous people telling famous stories, or that's all backed up and verified. The whole like bastard child thing's hard to tell. Anyway, I think because she was an interesting character and this work is relatively timeless, I think a lot gets read into it. Where the story of Frankenstein's pretty straightforward. Like it's a classic because it works in different time frames and different eras. The modern Prometheus subtitle is dropped in the Netflix. Again, sort of giving life. And that's the only reason I brought up when it was written, because Byron and Percy, Shelley, the poet, were both really enamored with the story of Prometheus and both write about Prometheus in other places. And so the fact that Mary Shelley includes that as the subtitle, I think, is telling that this is less about child loss and much more about creature creation, and the relationship between a creation and a creator. And certainly in parenting and offspring can come into that. But Del Toro definitely runs with like the parent piece and like losing a child and or death during childbirth. That is a shift from sort of where the story goes. The creature, in a lot of ways, I think, is less horrific in the movie than in the book. Um, in the book, like the creature goes on and kills Victor's bride to be on the night of his wedding because Victor didn't make him a bride and also abandoned him. And so the movie really fleshes out a lot of that and also introduces a brother character. So we have not just the creation creator dynamic, but we also have a sibling dynamic, which I don't know that it added anything to the story other than it sort of keeps the creature less. It adds some dimension to the creature to care about Victor's sister-in-law, but also, you know, be the cause of her death, even indirectly. And so I think it makes the creature far more sympathetic rather than just straight up vengeful, which is fine. Um, but also, I don't love like the dead wife trope. She, as a character, is not just as somebody to be married. She is the love interest of both Victor and Victor's brother. She rebuffs. I don't know. She turns Victor down when he sort of professes his love to her because she's going to marry his brother. Um, but she's also like a fascination for the creature, and um, she treats the creature as a loving parent would, where Victor's very harsh and abusive. And so I think the dimensions that Del Toro wants to get into are, again, a little bit more parenting focused rather than creator creation, which is where I think the original really focuses, if I'm remembering correctly. And that's fine. I think it works. I think it is an interesting take on where parenting can go wrong. And Victor, I mean, cares about the creature maybe more than cares for the creature. I mean, he keeps it locked in a wet basement. I mean, like, he's not kind to it. He beats it with a metal rod and, you know, is genuinely pretty terrible to it. But also, I have to imagine that was somewhat of the Gothic timeframes parenting. And again, a lot of that was gendered for no specific reason, that women are kind and comforting and men are tough and abusive. And that's certainly not true. Um, Victor decides to destroy the creature and everything he made. Sister-in-law's dad wants to be saved from syphilis. Nice nod to the syphilis culture that existed in the Gothic romantic time period. Lots of, I think, Gothic romance misses that like people were just ravaged by syphilis at this point in history. Um, Syphilis is not a fun disease, and I'm not making fun of it, but also relatively treatable in modern times. But it's one that's interesting. It eats your brain, and so you can start hallucinating. You have often visual hallucinations, things in your eyesight that aren't there. Capone famously had syphilis, a case so severe. Nope, that's a different joke. It's just ripping off someone's joke, but I can't credit it because I don't remember who did the joke. Anyway, the joke being that JFK contracted a case so severe that the back of his head blew off. Um, Bo Burnham, maybe? I don't know. Drop in the comments and let me know. I'm botching stealing someone's joke. But yeah, like, so there's this other character with syphilis, and Victor is like, no, this didn't work because the creature isn't intelligent, even though the creature is doing a ton of shit by the time it's reanimated. Um, The horror in the movie from the creature perspective, I think, is much more in Victor trying to sell his reanimation techniques to the universities. He's got like a torso and an arm of a creature that can like play catch with him, but just screams horrifically and like is pretty gross. And I thought that's what they were going to do with the creature, but the creature is much more like svelte. I don't know how to describe it. It's got like a skin to it. But the university pitch is rightfully sort of declined because it's pretty gross. And but yeah, so Victor has this chance to he creates life and immortal life for the most part. The creature doesn't seem to be able to die, and it heals from any injury very quickly. And Victor is unwilling to share that because he views it as a monstrosity. Uh, which will then follow him through. And so, Victor as the character is a child of abuse. His mother dies in childbirth for his younger brother, who then, like, the dad becomes enamored with and not with Victor. That's not usually how it goes. Oftentimes, parents who are raising a kid who is the birth that caused the birthing parent to die often carries a lot of baggage around because of that, and parents often struggle to differentiate the kid's fault versus we just want to be able to assign blame because our brains like to have control over things, even when something like childbirth is pretty uncontrollable. We like to pretend it's not. Biology is wildly complex, though. And so, Victor is the child of abuse who then turns around and is abusive and also like never works through any of his trauma. Just sort of becomes obsessive about things, whether it's making the creature or hunting the creature down. He's sort of, Ahab in Moby Dick, like this uniquely driven character who's not real fun for anyone to be around. He almost steps away from science and his sort of obsessiveness to pursue his brother's fiance, to pursue love. But then he doesn't. And he's a little obsessive about her too, not in like a creepy off-putting way, but in a like he's got bad boundaries sort of way. Um, and again, I think Oscar Isaac does a great job with this character, showing some nuance, showing some depth. But like, right, Victor's the monster, and that's always the thing, right? And so that holds true. Um, Victor's brother is pretty much is mentioned in the original novel, but as a side character, is a very unimportant side character. Just the fact that Victor does have some other family after everybody else seems to have been killed or dies, and yeah, he becomes this whole character and seems far more well adjusted. Um, being a kid who's raised by a parent who seems to dote on him, has a good relationship with his brother, but is aware his brother is sort of quirky and weird, um, particularly particular, as it were. And yeah, he does all this work for his brother. He's compensated well for it, it seems. Um, yeah, and then the monster shows up at the wedding and demands that Victor builds a bride, and Victor refuses, tries to kill the monster, kills the girl instead. Tragedy ensues, and then Victor becomes obsessed with killing the monster. Partway through the film, our perspective shifts, and we get the monster's perspective, and the monster fills in the blanks on after the laboratory is destroyed, how the monster survives, escapes, finds a cabin with a family, hides out, learns how to read and communicate because there's a blind grandfather teaching his granddaughter all those things, and he becomes the spirit of the forest, sort of this benevolent provider for the family, even though the family would reject him based on his looks if they knew. But he befriends the blind grandfather, and then some wolves attack. It's a bummer. More tragedy. It's more. The movie itself is almost more a tragedy, as we would understand it, than a horror film. It's just sad. Victor's a sad character. The monster's a sad character. There's nobody who really wins in this movie. The ship that the movie culminates on, they're stuck in ice and miserable. Nobody's winning. It's just sort of a more of like, I would argue almost more of a Greek tragedy retelling of Frankenstein than a true horror film was my read on it. So, um, but yeah, I mean, the monster being rejected by its creator, its parent per se, the monster having to deal with the fallout of the bride being killed, and he sort of carries her off to a cave, and she was nice to him, and so that's loss. We have this like, I'm gonna say, heavy-handed following of the color red being death, and the red hand specifically. I'm sure people will love it and really enjoy it. Again, I think because the movie was kind of boring in the first half hour, 40 minutes, I thought it was. Usually I'm here for that stuff. I like the symbolism, I like the motifs. As I mentioned, I have like a Rime of the Ancient Mariner tattoo of an albatross. Um, I'm here for it. I'm here for the symbolism, and I don't know. It was like almost too basic. It was like, make sure no one can miss what we're doing with this red hand of death business. Is fine. It didn't detract from the movie. It just didn't go anywhere particularly interesting or nuanced. It just sort of stayed, I think, heavy-handed. No pun intended. And yeah, the creature ends up mourning Victor's death and saves the ship from the ice. It seems to want to freeze to death, as opposed to going into a funeral pyre in its original story. I don't know. It's one of those weird things where it's like it's classic because it's really well done and it's timeless. And also, when you've seen so many things that it has inspired, it becomes less interesting. Frankenstein, the horror story, inspired modern horror. So there's nothing that people will have seen or indulged in that isn't affected by it, inspired by it in some form or fashion. And so I think it's really hard to go back to Frankenstein, the story, and not be like, well, yeah, all right. It's the way I felt when I watched Scarface. I was like, okay, it's because I grew up on Law and Order and watching all the Law and Orders be inspired by Scarface. Scarface as the seminal thing that changed the directory of like gangster media doesn't feel that awesome when you go back and watch it for the first time and you've seen everything else that is inspired. So that's sort of how I felt. Where it's like, yeah, it's kind of like a basic story. It's good. It works. It translates well from generation to generation, and it's kind of boring. The movie itself wasn't boring. It was slow to start. It picks up, and it's definitely worth watching. And it's just like, I don't know, not that revolutionary. It was revolutionary in its time, and then it revolutionized horror from then on. And I don't know. If you watch Nosferatu, it's great and also not earth shattering. If you watch the 1922 version, even less so. But you can see why it became so revolutionary, why it transcended the media that it changed. So I don't know. It was good. It's a lovely film. It's very well acted. Um, so go watch it. I don't know. I like it. It was good. It sounds like I'm not enamored with it. I don't know when I would ever rewatch it. It's well done. Maybe when my kids get older and want to get into it, be like, here's the modern one, and then watch a bunch of the earlier ones if they want to study the film. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It was a better adaptation than some. It kept like true enough to be of interest, I think, without going like beat for beat. The brother was a weird thing. I don't know. I don't know that the brother added anything for me. And I'm somebody who's like enamored with brother stories because I have two boys who are brothers, and that brother thing is very near and dear to my heart, and also the relationship I have with my brother. But like, yeah, even being somebody who's biased for brother stories, I don't know that it really added much. Um, but like definitely intergenerational trauma is here. We have the grief throughout. The dad of Victor's dad grieving the loss of his wife, who's kind of shitty too. Um, It's definitely intergenerational misogyny in this story, but also, I don't know, just yeah, go to therapy, work through your shit instead of passing it on to your kids. Don't get children if you're going to abuse them. Don't have a dog if you're going to abuse it. I don't know. Go to therapy. Deal with your shit accordingly, I would say. Um, as I'm recording this, I'm just hearing the noise that my dog is making, probably destroying something upstairs. He doesn't like when I work from home. Um, yeah, it was good. I think it's worth a watch. Again, I'm not like anti the movie, and I generally like Del Toro's work on stuff. I think it's worth a watch, and it's a good 2 hours to spend on a film. It's not going to change your life. It's not revolutionary, but sometimes film and art is just nice to enjoy because it's nice. If you've not read the original story, I would also recommend that and read up on Mary Shelley's life. It's interesting. She is this interesting intersection of a bunch of famous people while sort of being like poor for most of her life. It's just a thing that a lot of artists were back then. Support your local artists is a takeaway from this, I guess. Um, I feel like there was one other point I wanted to make, but I'm not remembering what it was. So, yeah, Frankenstein on Netflix or wherever you pirate your shit from. Go watch it. It's worth a watch. Okay. I don't know. Like, subscribe, do the YouTubey things. I don't have a ton about this one. It was enjoyable. So go watch it. Drop down in the comments what else you would like to hear me talk about. I like to talk about mental health in pop culture. Unfortunately, a lot of things with mental health in the modern times and pop culture aren't real deep. So, I talk about pop songs that don't have very good messages or Frankenstein adaptations that are enjoyable but not overly deep beyond grief is bad for you and you should work through your shit instead of taking out on future generations. Ta-da! All right. With that, take care of yourself. Take care of somebody else. Peace.